Welcome to the House of Azor podcast. I'm your host, William, and join me today will be Sean.
Hello.
And on this episode, we'll be discussing Midsommar, the new movie from director Ari Aster, who also did Hereditary last year.
Did he do anything before that?
He had done some short
getting
films.
ready for the podcast after we've started. Just some short films then?
Yeah, because Bloody Disgusting has shared some article the other day that had links to all of his past short films. And I watched a little bit of some of it. Didn't have a chance to watch too much of it.
What was the production value on those? Was it a pretty high level, or were they
I didn't see
closer to our level, which, not
Yeah.
terrible, but granted, his was, I'm sure, earlier than...
Well, I only watched a little bit of one. I'm like one of the earlier ones. Because I like some of the later ones, like the time... I think there's one that's like 30 minutes and one that's like some shorter length ones, like in the teens and single digits. So I don't really watch enough of them to really judge.
Yeah.
I don't really remember, but... yeah, because a lot of times with like the shorts... so you have some people like David F. Sandberg, who did the Lights Out movie and Annabelle and Shazam, and his Lights Out short film was very well done, but was shot for literally nothing. It was just him and his wife in their apartment, I think. But he had like a background in like previs effects and doing different animation stuff, I think. So just like no budget shorts, and you see some people do short films. So Dan Trachtenberg, who was the director of 10 Cloverfield Lane, did that Portal short film. Did you see that one?
Yeah, I don't know if I watched all of it, but I definitely watched clips of it.
And that was one where I think he poured like his life savings into it and called in a bunch of favors of people who watched their the podcast show he used to be on, Tully Rad Show. So there's ones where people put like tens of thousands of dollars of resources into them, and ones where people like when we do them, we put a few $100, or that's including food and all that stuff. So I have to go back and watch more of those because I don't honestly remember because I've been so busy.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of off topic, but yeah, I wondered like how big he was in, I guess, more like professional productions before. Because like with somewhat on topic, the director of Spider-Man, what's his name?
Oh, John Watts.
John Watts.
Of the new Spider-Man films.
He did Clown, which started out like as a teaser trailer they made, and they promoted it that it was Eli Ross.
Yeah.
And I, watching even the new Spider-Man, I was like, okay, I can't believe this guy went from Clown to both of these films.
I think he had worked in TV in different levels over the decade.
And that's what I had heard, that I was listening to a podcast from the DP, and he said he knew him from, they both worked in commercials for a while. Which makes sense, that they would have the confidence, but that's what some people, they work in the industry and then they make that jump to feature filmmaking or whatever, even if they haven't done a lot. They may have been very well versed in storytelling.
Well, I think so his short film started in 2011. So it's The Strange Thing About the Johnsons.
I've heard that's really good. I forgot about that.
Bo, then Munchausen, basically Turtle's Head, Seslavy. So that was in 2016. So they went from making a short in 2016 to Hereditary in 2018. So, it is definitely possible to make the jump from just doing shorts to features. And I think a lot of it is, did somebody make a short that was just purely a concept, where they did some clever visual trick or something like that? Or is it like, are they actually telling stories in these things? Because that's why I've been trying to focus more like writing stuff recently, is like, okay, let's do a story. Let's not worry about what the concept is.
Yeah, just flex your ability to work with actors too. You know what I mean? Because they know that's the important part. They don't care about, all the time they don't care about production value. They want it to look competent and everything, but you're going to have somebody handling that, so how can you,
Well, you said that,
tell a story.
You see, like, John Watts went from doing, like, a fake trailer for a clown film to getting it produced by Eli Roth to doing Spider-Man, Homecoming, and Far From Home, and then I would assume the third film. But, yeah, so with Ari Aster with Hereditary, so that's when we discussed that back when that came out. So we'd have an episode on that. A lot of opinions on that movie.
Where did you land on it?
So it's one of those movies where I appreciated the craft and what it was, but I didn't necessarily enjoy it that much. And I don't really think that I've changed my stance on that since then.
I'm pretty much in the same boat as far as not changing my stance, but I haven't revisited it. But it was a film that it gave me it was an experience, and I remember many things from that film, but it was unsettling in a way that I really didn't want to go back and watch it, only because it was just, there was a real lack of joy, which was the a point of that film, you know, because the family was dealing with a tragedy, and it was like this dark family drama on one side. So it was one I didn't really want to go visit, but I saw why everybody loved it, and I did. I think I'm guessing I probably gave it like an 8.5 or something. Like I liked it a lot. But it wasn't one that I am going out to sing its praises for people to go watch and
because there's
I haven't bought it, like I said, or watched it again.
Because I'd say that so Midsommar and Hereditary, I think both of them fall in the category of art house horror. So they are there's a number of movies that fit in that label. I know that there's been discussion about the label of elevated horror going around and people disliking that, and a lot of disagreement about what is horror and what isn't. I think that label sometimes gets misapplied to things, but it's kind of like, oh, snooty art house horror that doesn't want it just to be Friday the 13th Part 20.
But I think both those films, though, I think they're also, on some regards, an easy watch in that they are not 100% cerebral. You know what I mean? Like they aren't worried about, they aren't totally focused on the viewer's interpretation of it. You know, they do have a story. It's easy to follow. But it is not. I mean, he even said for this film, like jump scares did not. That did not interest him because that is not what he's interested.
Well, because I think so for Midsommar, I think originally A24 brought this to him and it was more of a slasher film set in Sweden, and then he kind of recrafted it from what that initially like being set there to what this movie eventually is.
So what I had heard, again, I don't, on one podcast, he said that a Swedish production company came to him about doing a Swedish-based folk horror film.
Yeah, I think
because they had read Hereditary, it wasn't out yet, and then he kind of worked it into doing a breakup movie, blend it with that. So I don't know if that production company kind of started with that, and then her A24 got on board with that.
I think it was just like people brought the movie to him. Mm-hmm. Initially, it was more of a slasher film, and then
I didn't know a slasher, so we must have different sources. That's interesting.
Or maybe the sources were just extrapolating from something else. So basically, they came to him and said, "We want a movie set here."
Yeah.
And then he made it into his own and made it what we saw in theaters. So it wasn't. Because a lot of times, you do have like a lot of spec scripts that are floating around. If you know what that is, it's just a script that somebody writes that's not for your pre-existing franchise. So somebody just writes some original story, and they're just sitting around. But there's a lot of people, like I would assume, with Astor, since he's written his own movies, I would assume that he's probably going to continue that trend of writing, unless he gets offered some bigger property.
Yeah, and it sounds like this one he wrote. So first of all, we're going to start with no spoilers. We'll announce when we're going to spoilers. I got the new Fangoria in just like the other day, thankfully, which I really like that trend of seeing Us and then the Fangoria coming like right after the day after I saw it, and the same thing happened with this. So in that, Jordan Peele's interviewing him. He said he has like either 8 or 9 or 9 or 10 scripts done sitting there, but it sounds like either he molded one to fit this, or he put all that stuff on the back burner and this opportunity came. So yeah, it very much sounds like he wants to work on his own things. Like it would be interesting to see what would draw him away, like.
Yeah, I mean,
like what would make him, like what is it if he's getting enough money to make this film, which was like between 10 and 15 million or something. I'd heard it pretty much made its budget back. It wasn't a knockout hit this weekend, but it did well enough to where A24 is not sweating. So
it grossed in its opening weekend or from. Through the end of the weekend, 10.9 million. So that's the way those movies.
Domestic, I believe.
Yeah, the way those movies play, it'll definitely make money back for them at some point, because Hereditary, I don't think it made that much more. I think it just played over time.
Yeah.
And
it may have made like 13 or 14. The opening weekend, which.
Yeah. Well, it's just I guess we should give a basic synopsis, like I said, without spoilers, and some of these synopsises even have too much in them. So I'm just going to tell you a part of one. A couple travels to Sweden to visit a rural hometown's fabled midsummer festival. And that's all you need to know. I mean...
and so, I think it's, this is a horror film. It's a folk horror tale in the tradition of the Wicker Man. And he specifically... And I even think that's important to know because I was listening to one interview with him, and he specifically wants the audience to know that because it plays into the impact the film has on you while watching it, because you know everything is not going to be all right at the end of this movie.
Yeah, because you go into it knowing, somebody says Wicker Man inspired or anything like that, which is funny because we were looking at places to go on vacation, and there was some thing that Julie had found, I forget where it was, but it was this private island that only allows 28 people on it, or 28 or 32, somewhere around there, like 30 people at a time on the island. You have to park on land to take a ferry to the island, and then there's nobody else.
Found that same
there's
thing
nobody else allowed on it. She's like, this is straight up the beginning of a horror film.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it was really expensive, so we had no interest in doing it anyway. But it's just like this is a horror film waiting to happen. But with with the idea of people, it's and two. So you have like the Wicker Man style movies, and then you have the post 9/11 like Hostel, basically the Eli Roth the Americans go and get killed abroad films became kind of in vogue. This has elements that are somewhat not completely out of line with something like Hostel, maybe, because there is some brutal gore at points, and it is Americans going out and interacting in foreign countries and doing stupid stuff.
Yeah.
So like those elements are the same, but it's not really played up for the same visceral thrills. And I would argue that Hostel may have made more of a conscious decision to try to make you like the characters before stuff happened than this movie did. But
I absolutely hated the characters in Hostel.
no, I mean, like, I didn't like them.
Maybe they tried to.
Well, yeah, because not saying what they succeeded or failed at. It just seems like they tried to give you more stereotypical things to hang your hat on, like, oh, this is a nice guy.
Yes.
And then as opposed to this movie, all the characters. Because I guess we go through the cast, because the cast in this was some very talented actors. So Florence Pugh was the main star, Danny. And then Jack Rayner played her boyfriend in the film, Christian. And then William Jackson Harper was Josh.
He's Chidi from The Good Place.
Wilhelm Blomgren was Pell. Will Poulter was Mark.
And Will Poulter is the redheaded guy. He's in The Revenant.
Yeah.
And he was also in Detroit playing like an asshole cop, and he was phenomenal in that.
He was in that Black Mirror Bandersnatch, the Choose Your Own Adventure version. And there were some other people in it, but like the main.
Apparently, it was a who's who of Swedish talent, and I think they were saying like even some bigger names just almost played background sometimes.
Yeah. So I mean, like the basic idea is that you have, I guess they're grad students because they're working on like their college thesis and stuff like that. So you have Danny's character, and she has like family problems with their mom and dad and sister. And she has the boyfriend Christian, who's not a very attentive, caring boyfriend, who was on the verge of breaking up with her, but then they stick together.
And it's almost like, okay, is it the relationship not right at the beginning? You know what I mean? Like I think they do a really good job of I think transforming your views on people in this a little bit, only because it is like a relationship. Like, you know what I mean? You see some things change because of the things they have to deal with, and I just really like the way this film starts out, and then the way it evolves too.
Yeah. So throughout the course, the basic setup is they're gonna go on a trip to Switzerland and stay with one of their fellow students that's from there, and go and visit his family in their commune, I guess, for the Midsummer Festival. And then Danny ends up tagging along and going with them.
And part of the reason is, now I'm forgetting his name, what's Chidi's character's name?
Josh.
He is doing his thesis on Midsummer traditions. So I think that's a big reason why they're all going to. They're kind of tagging along. Essentially.
Yeah, and then like if there's a way to make you not care about a character's motivation to do things, I think writing their thesis. Because so one thing I would say about like this movie, so just to give you a basic idea, so there is some gore, because Hereditary had a small amount of gore. I would say this has similar types of gore at different points in time and different scenarios. But if that was too much for you, this has more, I think. And it does have characters who basically make very stupid decisions and do things no reasonable person would probably do. I mean, I think most of these movies, if you don't have some suspension of disbelief for that, the second anything happens, everybody leaves, if it was realistic.
So the thing, it mostly, I was mostly okay with any reason for people to stick around. One was, I'm not saying this film does it perfectly, but one thing I really love is kind of social horror, in that I'm not talking about like social commentary horror necessarily, but the social aspect of not wanting to offend somebody. Even if you know something bad is going on or something. The Haneke's Funny Games, like I love that film mainly. I mean, in large part because of the build-up and the not wanting to offend, but also when you feel like there's something's not right.
Well, yeah, because there is.
You know what I mean? Like, I think this film doesn't really. That isn't the point of this, but it is an element to it, I think.
Yeah, because I don't think it's really built on. I definitely get that there is the element in the film of characters witnessing things, and then it's like, oh, is this just a cultural difference?
Yes,
where I
exactly.
should forgive it?
Yes.
And then you get back to the whole like cultural relativism type stuff that, so in the movie the majority of the characters are anthropology majors, and no offense to anybody, but like when I was in college and I took anthropology classes, they drove me crazy because they're the people that are complete cultural relativists who believe that you don't live in the culture, you don't know it. Even though it's morally wrong in our society, you can't claim that same morality on a society that operates under different rules. And it's like, well, then that's when you get into condoning genital mutilation of children and stuff. And I disagree with that hard.
What is it? With Eli Roth, Green Inferno, right?
Yeah.
That's the point they brought up in the beginning. Yeah, in the beginning.
Yeah, so you have all this kind of stuff.
Which is another sort of similar genre film.
Yeah, I would say that
Loosely.
this movie doesn't really linger on any of that. It doesn't make a point of it, because I think a lot of times, like in the case of Green Inferno, to me, the commentary felt completely flat and was played for a joke, especially about some of the stuff that Eli Roth had said on Twitter around the movie's release. And that movie, I think, was meant to be funny. I don't think it was meant to be taken all that seriously. And this movie, I think, also was meant to play a lot of things for laughs, because it's all in bright summer. I mean, there are some scenes that are more dim or indoors, but it's mostly in a super bright outdoor setting. And then there's a contingent that thinks that anything set in the bright sunlight or well lit can't be horror. I was like, well, that's just ridiculous.
It is an important element to this film, but everybody is losing their mind. Like, oh, this bright set. It's like some of my favorite horror films of all time take place in broad daylight. You know what I mean? Like, Don't Look Now. I'm not saying it's all broad daylight, but the horror there is happening right out in the open in the Venice street. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and there's just, again, like Funny Games, like much of that. Killing the Sacred Deer recently. Like, there's so many good horror films that that don't rely on darkness as a crutch. And
you could argue that since the setting of the movie is where they have really long days, so it's only like 3 to 4 hours of darkness per night, they are out at midnight.
Yeah, and that is a really unique element, though. And don't get me wrong, like, and the way they shoot it too, it's even just the color palette is not what you expect. Even those other films that I mentioned, the color palette to this is very like a bunch of pastels. And so I think that, along with the humor, and the humor isn't there just to break tension. It's not like a rise and fall, like, let's break some tension.
Yeah.
It's almost like at odds, and you're like, well, I think that's what makes me believe that the characters are not all that worried with what's going on around them. I don't think for me, it wasn't necessarily that they're stupid. It's that they're making jokes a lot of times, and it is because they generally don't feel much fear yet.
Well, like, and another thing that I think feeds into a lot of it throughout the movie, I don't think it's huge spoiler, like it happens early on too, like there is some usage of recreational drugs. Mm-hmm. And then I think about the times that I've been places and people were on like the psychedelics and stuff like that. And it's like, no, people did do stupid stuff and just didn't really care.
Yeah.
Is like, mushrooms, that stuff where I've never done but I've seen people out in public that I even know, just like if you go to any music festival or somebody on it.
And this is a minor, this is a minor spoiler to jump off this, like throughout the entire thing, they're eating their food in this community. As soon as they walk in, after that, they eat strawberries. You know what I mean? Like the entire film is and even the trailer, they say this is like a whole nother world.
So if you're like, that's one of those things I always think about, like myself in these situations. I'm somebody that I don't have too many qualms with not accepting food from people. So it's like, I don't think I want this.
Yes, yeah. See, and culturally, you might think like, and they even said, they're like, okay, is this fine? You know what I mean? Like, I think that is a cultural thing too, where, oh, they're giving me this gift. I don't want to offend, you know. But also too, these characters, some of them seem like very much like, oh, we're on this trip. We want to experience it to the fullest.
Yeah.
We're here to do this. You know what I mean? We're not here to turn away anything.
Yes.
We're here to fully be enveloped in this midsummer tradition.
And yeah, so you have like the midsummer festivities. Oh, have you seen the thing that A24 is pushing, like the little ad they had for the bear
yes,
collectible?
yeah.
So they have a collectible that's a bear in a cage. It's like an ornament type thing. And I guess they're actually selling some.
Yeah.
But the ad for it was really funny because it was shot in like the same style as the movie. But yeah, and like the other thing too, like the cinematography and everything looking nice and crisp. Like a lot of times, there was some movie, I forget what it's called, that was on Netflix I'd heard about. It was like a horror film that had Yvonne Strahovski in it, who's from like Chuck and Handmaid's Tale. Mm-hmm. And I forget what, it was like a slasher home invasion film. And like the outdoor scenes were all really blown out and all the highlights are blown. So the whites were so bright you could no longer see detail in it. And it's just super bright. And this movie doesn't do that.
It does a great job of writing the line. It doesn't blow it all the way, but it just... the whole thing just feels bright and it feels almost fun. Like
you feel like it's a bright outdoorsy summer place, but it's not blown out and annoying because some of those movies, it's like I've seen some independent stuff where people shoot in outdoor conditions and then it's just so blown out you can't even see somebody's face. Yeah, it's like a white blob.
And I think there's a lot of praise to be put there to make it so attractive looking the whole time when it is out in these bright outdoors, because obviously they probably did a lot of things to make it look this nice and natural at the same time.
And then there were a number of shots in this film that are just kind of stationary shots of like a camera just in place for like a minute, and a lot of those are very effective.
Yeah, and he says too, he does that stuff to get himself in a box, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad.
Yeah.
But just so he kind of commits to something and goes. And there's so much precision to the directing too at times when he wants there to be. Like composition, color, just this is a great looking and sounding film. And it, for me, I was expecting a very heavy experience like Heredity, and I saw Spider-Man first because that came out first, and the next day I saw this. And in my mind, I was thinking, I wish I could swap these two to have like a palate cleanser of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But I walked out of this like in a good mood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like this was not the same vibe as Hereditary.
Well, I think that so coming out of Hereditary versus this film, Hereditary leaves everybody kind of on a down note. And I think part of it is because it grounds things in more of this kind of family trauma and, family drama. So you kind of have like these things that are more relatable to some people and or that ground the movie more, as opposed to this one. I don't know if I guess it's equally outlandish things happen. Like both movies could exist in the same universe.
Yeah.
Just with the characters never crossing paths. But
the rules seem the same. Let's just say the rules. This
one felt, well, at least like in Hereditary, if they hinted at something and gave you some idea about whether or not that thing is actually real or real at all. This one is a little bit more obscure on that end, and it's more just about the people and how they interact with traditions.
It's very much about Dani's journey. I mean, everything is centered around her. She is the main character.
Yeah.
We're focused on her pretty much from the beginning, and so it is. And I'll get into this more in spoilers, but there's a lot to talk about. I guess her journey in the film, but yeah, I want to save some of that for spoilers. Anything else we can think of to talk about before we jump into spoilers?
Like I said, so the performances were all very strong. I think everybody was doing good work. I think that the atmosphere and the building up of that was very well done. A little bit like a little bit played out in terms of people go to community and things aren't as they seem, because that's been done a bunch.
It's very much straight down the line of genre.
Because
it still subverted some of my expectations. And he said going down this road of this type of film, he didn't want to. I'm trying to think of the right word. betray anybody's expectations completely on what to expect. But also for me, he walked the line of committing to some of that stuff, but also making it his own. And two, there hasn't been one that has felt like this, has dealt with this sort of same story, and just had this sort of vibe. So I think for me, even though it plays in a specific genre, at least he made it his own.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't, like, in recent years, I can't think of a movie that plays exactly like this, because there's some stuff, what was the Ty West movie, The Sacrament, I think?
Yeah.
And then there have been a few other movies where people go to different, you know, of course, there's like Handmaid's Tale, but that's more like an entire society, you know, more dystopian future versus like an idealistic society or something. But, you know, it's not rehashing Jonestown and James, you know, all that stuff. So it's not rehashing that exactly. There's also, I watched that Netflix series, Wild Wild Country, about the Rajneesh Puram in Oregon and stuff. And when you start watching that series, so it's on Netflix, and it's about a real thing that happened in Oregon in the 1980s. And you think it's going to end like people would think a movie like this ends. And then you're like, well, real life, it doesn't quite go as far as movies do. But it doesn't stay, but it also doesn't fall too short either. So, but you know, with this movie, you know, it's one where I came out of. I think I definitely enjoyed it more than the viewing experience of Hereditary. Mainly it's because like the sun-soaked visuals and all this stuff left there more going on to keep you interested, as opposed to with Hereditary, if you weren't buying into, you know, the relationship between Toni Collette's character and like her son and all that stuff, then this one has more going on to keep your interest. And then I do think that in terms of like pure horror elements, in terms of seeing gore or deaths or things like that, I think this movie has more than Hereditary. Because I was trying to remember.
It has more fun. I mean, there, you know, that there was a moment in the film where, you know, I don't like to say this because I don't want to hype things up too much, but if you listen this far, you know, you need to be convinced to see it based on our opinions or not. So I'm going to kind of go into some more of my deeper opinions, but there's one point of it where I was sitting there and I realized I had my mouth open watching a certain scene.
Yeah.
And I was like this, like, and I was waiting for something to come, and the guy behind me started saying, "What the F? What the F?" I'm going to try to avoid F-bombs and see if we can not get an explicit on this. He's like, "What the F?" And he said that multiple times throughout the film, and it's one of those things where, again, I think for me it kept tension throughout because it plays in this genre. So, you know, and it's what is it, like 2 hours and 20 minutes or something like that.
I think it's listed like 2 hours and 27 minutes.
Yeah,
So it's not short.
No, so I think it ratchets the tension. I don't, slow burn is maybe not even the right word for it because it is somewhat of a drama. So it is not like you're just sitting there waiting for something to happen, because these characters, you know, you're watching these characters play out. And for me, I enjoyed watching these characters because some were very flawed or just not great people. And so I don't necessarily would call it a slow burn for myself, but it is a longer movie. But for me, it didn't feel slow. It gave it more of an feeling of an epic than a 90-minute horror film.
Because I was trying to remember, like, because I think in terms of the timeline, it took about an hour before you got to Switzerland in the movie. So it doesn't move super fast. It does a lot of setup. It kind of gives you where the characters are and all the relationships, and kind of gives you the background information. So you're not, like I said, I don't think you're super attached to the characters. You just understand them better. So when they get there, you know a little bit more about, you know, like maybe why people are doing things. I mean, but some of the side characters you don't get a ton of, development on until, you know, later in the film. Because was it Pele? You don't really get a lot about him until you get to.
Pele's the one who belongs to the town.
Yeah, his family is from there. So, yeah, I guess we can. So, like, looking at some of these scores and the reviews and things. So, Rotten Tomatoes, it's got an 83% and a 61% audience score. And then on IMDb, it's got a 7.8 out of 10 user score and a 72 Metacritic. So basically on the low end, it goes from 61% up to the high of 83% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I definitely think it falls somewhere in there, in that It's very well made. It's very well acted. The craft is there, and it definitely has enough elements that you walk away having seen something. Because I think like a big knock on a lot of these art house horror films, if you want to use that term, is people come out and they say, "I just spent 2 hours to watch what?" Mm-hmm. And then you often see people walk out who hated it. Because I've experienced that with something like It Follows that was even more mainstream than this. Really, in terms of what you're seeing in the film.
Do you think that's more mainstream than this? I think some people are turned off by the leaps in just having to believe the logic of some of this stuff. I don't know exactly, but because I feel like this is a horror film I could recommend to non-horror fans. Yeah, because it is taken seriously in some regards, and I feel like there's a lot to hang on in this film. There's a lot of, for me, positives to it that isn't just one element.
I guess it is.
There's a lot of blood,
Yeah, I guess it is tough. I guess what I'd say is like with It Follows, it has what you consider more traditional scares and a more traditional threat. But that was one where people came out saying, "Oh, I hate this," and then like the Babadook and Hereditary
and I was wondering if this would fall in line with those
Suspiria
things. Because again, I love Suspiria, but Babadook I wasn't super hot on. Hereditary, I didn't fall in line with those people that were saying it was,
a visionary
the greatest horror film of the year, anything like that. And Jordan Peele's,
Get Out.
One of his pull quotes for this was that this has elements in here that a lot of people are gonna have to compete with. That people will have to take notice of and compete with in the coming years of making horror films. And that was like a recent quote, and I was thinking, I'm in Jordan Peele's camp, and I was thinking, after Get Out and Us, I'm like, okay, is that him kind of playing ball? Like, this guy's a contemporary of his now that is a huge name in horror. And I was like, is this him kind of being friendly and cordial and giving him a little a bump up,
Yeah.
But for me, after seeing the film, I'm on that page, and I'm like, I did not expect to like this as much as I liked Us. But I think I probably liked it more. Again, I've only seen both those once. I just got Us to watch again. But I'm just throwing that out there just because a lot of times those films that get those praise, I'm somewhere like an 8 or around an 8 range, or even like Babadook. I'd have to watch it again, but that didn't do much for me. But for this one, just to give context, this one lived up to it for me and actually surpassed it, which is not the case for everybody on this one.
Well, and two, I think you draw, like the Babadook, you take the metaphorical meaning away of this is, like most of these movies are, it's, really about this. So this movie you can say, it's about relationships that should end. And, the Babadook was about being a parent, not wanting to be. And then there's all these, like It Follows is about more than the explicit like STD thing, was more about becoming an adult and having consequences for your actions when you're no longer a child who can just do whatever and your parents fix it. So I think there's a lot of these movies have these kind of undercurrents and themes, and how well you connect to that theme, I think a lot of time really determines how well you like the film, or if you just, like the performances or the visuals. But yeah, so like in terms of giving a score, I don't know, it's kind of hard to give a score, because like in terms of a craft level, like the special effects and the gore and stuff they do have in it was top notch. The cinematography and the acting and the sound and the music and the sound design, all that was top notch.
Sounds like you just didn't totally connect with being along with the characters.
Yeah, like I didn't come out of it getting like much visceral thrill. Mm-hmm. And there's some of this stuff we can stay for spoilers, because it's, characters. Oh, there's a cat in here attacking the camera.
I think we're still all right.
Yeah, but it's just determining to how much of the characters are, how much of the experiences the characters. See, I can move around since we have the wireless mics.
Yeah.
How much is the characters exerting their free will, and how much is being influenced by the environment. But overall, like I definitely liked it more than Hereditary, but it's not like my specific jam. But I definitely appreciate what it is. So like 6.5, 7. So it's like something where I appreciate what it is.
Yeah.
And I think this is far more interesting than somebody pumping out another just blood and guts film that doesn't really have any story to it. Because there's a lot of horror stuff that comes out, or anything. I mean, too, I guess part of
Any
your-
genre,
when you're
can get tired.
But too, when you see like indie stuff, so I don't really think you'd ever consider this an indie because it get released by a studio. But when you're talking about like the under $15 million budget films that don't have your Brad Pitts and Tom Cruises and Will Smiths in them, like I appreciate them people just doing something versus this being a slasher film, like it could have possibly been based on like what they kind of. So like I appreciate them doing that. And I think with like Hereditary
Could have been Green
and this
Inferno
back
set
to
in Sweden.
back to back, I think I appreciate what Ari Aster is doing. It may not be exactly what is my specific jam, but I definitely appreciate it and want to keep seeing what he does because it's one of those things where maybe the next movie will hit on a theme that definitely hits home with me completely.
Yeah, for some reason this really hit me. Well, one of the reasons you talked about it's very specific to it just being a film. Let's say a lot of kills. With a lot of kills we've seen before. If I can get in a quote unquote horror film, if I can get at least one moment that stands out for me and that actually has me like thinking, oh my god, then that's a big thing for me. You know what I mean? At this point of cinema's history and of all the films that are out, and I feel like I've seen something maybe similar to one of the scenes that maybe do this in this film, and pretty much mainly just the one scene did it. But I have a thing for people who are either harming somebody or themselves almost willingly, but not out of malice. You know what I mean? Like there's a weird thing there that I really find interesting, and part of this film deals with that element to it where death is, you know what I mean, either necessary, and maybe sometimes forced.
Or if somebody's, they have like a detached utilitarian type thought process about violence. It's
yes,
like
or human life. Yeah, or human life or anything that I find much more interesting than just somebody getting chased and killed, which still can be fabulously entertaining.
Yeah.
But at least there's a moment in this film that made me think, oh, that was that moment. I can relive that in my mind over and over, and that's seared in my mind. Not that it was the most horrific thing ever, but at least it made me feel something. So on that end, as a horror film, it succeeds. But also, too, Danny's journey through this, I absolutely loved. I love that the ending can be interpreted different ways as far as... I think most people... Well, I don't know. I think some people could walk away saying, hey, I like the way things turned out. And look at that at different angles, or think the way things turned out was terrible.
Well, I've seen too. There was a meme that it showed like I think it was from The Departed, and it showed Jack Nicholson's character and Matt Damon's character watching him at the theater, and Jack Nicholson was like laughing, and Matt Damon was kind of like cringing. And then on Matt Damon, it said boyfriends watching Midsummer. And then on Jack Nicholson, it said their girlfriends watching Midsummer.
Yeah, again, this is Danny's story. So for me, like I hate making certain comparisons, but I was like, I wonder if this will be... I like to watch The Shining in the winter at least once as an epic horror film. I may end up watching this. This may be a pair for me. This may be my summer horror film to throw on at least once a year.
Because I would say it's more...
Because I love the journey. There was a lot of fun to it because it was humorous. Some of the scenes of it, and again, I'll kind of touch on... It felt a little bit like Wizard of Oz and Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Wicker Man. You know what I mean? Like, so there's enough elements there, but also I love the characters, and, sometimes it's entertaining when people, even if they don't maybe necessarily deserve something, if they, get what's coming to them. A lot of things to love about this film. Like, so we can jump into spoilers now. Me personally, like I give it like a 10 out of 10 on my personal scale. Super excited to see what he does next. But I wouldn't be surprised if I was a little lukewarm on the next thing he did. You know what I mean? Just based on
the nature of what...
and what he's playing at. But, I think he really, for me, did really something special here. And this has actually made me stand up and take huge notice of him. It being a sophomore effort and not being a complete miss, after swinging.
Because like if you would look at like other contemporaries, say like Jordan Peele, but I think somebody out of like other recent kind of, if you want to use the term, prestige horror film, like other comparable, or somebody who's, I think their works are more comparable or at least thematically and things. So I think that The Witch from Robert Eggers is more in the wheelhouse of Hereditary and Midsommar in terms of like what they're doing.
Yes.
And because like I know,
but this also has as much fun, or maybe more than Get Out and Us. But I agree that the vibe of it is closer to those films. This is a weird mix, and I think that's why it works for me more than Hereditary.
Yeah. So before getting into spoilers, if you're listening via iTunes or any podcast app, do us a huge favor and leave a review. That helps other people find the podcast. You find all the stuff we're doing at houseofvideostore.com. Find links to our social media accounts, to Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all that stuff. Then on Instagram recently, since Instagram TV switched over to allowing you to upload landscape videos, not to do the vertical stuff, I've been reposting some of our short films from there, so you can check those out on Instagram TV, which is, it's nice. It does like a minute of preview in the timeline, and you just open it to expand it, and then you can turn the phone sideways and watch it the way it was intended. Because recutting stuff for vertical is, I'm glad they made the decision to go away from that, because that was...
Just turn your phone.
I mean, 'cause like
you know what I mean?
So if we're sitting here recording this video to go vertical video, we would turn the camcorder on its side so that it's, instead of being horizontal, it's vertical.
And then we would be like this.
or you just like record two people separate and then cut it in half and all kinds of dumb stuff. But I'm glad they went to that normal horizontal videos. So all the stuff there, you can just find everything at houseofvideostore.com. If you want to find us specifically on the internet, you can find me on Instagram at @TheWilliamCast.
And I'm at Blevin Sean.
Yeah, so now we'll move into full spoilers for Midsommar. So if you haven't seen it, we're going to discuss all the big plot points or all the big things or some of them. So you've been warned. But yeah, so the moment when the older couple walk off of the I guess the ledge or the cliff or whatever, and the woman falls face first on the rock and her face is all smashed in, like that got a pretty visceral reaction to people. And then when the man decided...
You saw that hammer and you knew it was coming. You're like, oh my God,
when he made the terrible decision to walk off feet first, so that he landed and just grotesquely broke his leg, and then got his head smashed in with the mallet, that was kind of a WTF moment.
The other meme I saw was Gallagher with a watermelon. It said Midsommar.
Yeah, so you had...
Like that moment, because it was the moment the characters... There was a lot of things... that came to crescendo at that point. Even earlier in the film, when he talks about the seasons of life, and so what happens at season 4, he's like, and knowing this is like this type of film,
he's not joking.
He's probably not joking, or is the director playing with us? And then slowly find out, no, he's not playing with us. That's what happens. Yes.
Yeah, because its life is split up into like 1 to 18, 18 to 36, 36 to 52, and 52 to 72, somewhere in those range. So basically, it's just when you're a child, then you're an adolescent, then you're a worker, and then you're an elder, and then you're dead.
And again, that's I told Derek. I said, don't read plot synopsis for this, because the film has quite a long build up to this, but still, it's only about halfway through the film, and it's just one of those things where, again, it's the cultural thing. So they're like, oh God, like these people willingly jumped off. This is a cultural thing. This is really messed up, but well,
I think too,
we're safe, I assume, because this is all part of their ceremony.
But I think that this is the point at which any reasonable person would have wanted to head for the hills and leave immediately. But if the movie allowed that, the people actually would just leave and be gone out of the story. Or it would force the hand of the locals and make sure they took care of them before they could leave and tell anybody.
Which is what happened to another pair.
So you have the element of it, it's just going to end the story really early. So, then of course you have the element of the character Josh wanting to write his thesis about it and research this group of people. Is the reason he wants to stay, because he's just more fascinated in it from a kind of very selfish, what can I get out of this and write a paper about. Mm-hmm. And then Christian starts to get that same viewpoint of wanting to write his thesis about it.
Somebody brought up the appropriation angle.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, oh, I'm going to do that too.
Yeah, so you have the element of they're wanting to stick around to steal the ideas.
And she's at a point where she has nobody. You know what I mean?
So
like she doesn't want to leave.
Her mother and father died. And her sister killed herself with CO2 inhalation from the tailpipe of a car. And then she also killed her parents by duct taping their door and having the CO2 go in.
Again, the way this starts out is, I think, for me, very powerful. I was just
And then
very horrifying beginning, I think we can now know to expect. It's almost like M. Night Shyamalan has this twist. Ari Aster has this terrible family tragedies. You know what I mean?
And then you get the feeling then that so that her boyfriend Christian, prior to her mother, father, and sister all dying, was wanting to break up with her and just been delaying it. I guess because he felt bad for her because of her family situation. All of his friends were trying to convince him to go through with it. And then, of course, after her, mother, father, and sister die, he stays with her, probably out of guilt, just to stick around because he wanted to be.
And it may not be
alone.
guilt. It maybe it's not right for her, but he may care for her enough to try to help her through it. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. I think there's an interesting dynamic there.
He may be staying there just out of a sense of duty or guilt. But then throughout the movie, I'm
gonna go ahead and say this. I dated a girl after she got in a bad car accident. We were kind of talking, and she got in a bad car accident, life-threatening. Friend passed away. It was bad. So, her friend didn't pass away. Sorry, one of her friends was very bad off, and then so I was like, oh man, you know what I mean. So I naturally even became closer to her because I was like, just like, hey, you all right? You know what I mean? Like, but some of these angles I identify with, even some of the shitty stuff. You know what I mean?
It's too, personally, I'm a pastor, maybe where I dated somebody and they had life circumstances that made me feel like I should help them through that versus just playing up bait. So
just to be a human being. You know what I mean?
So you get that from the movie, but you don't get a lot of characterization because Christian's also the boyfriend that doesn't remember how long they've been dating.
Yes.
And forgets her birthday. And
he's mostly uninterested.
And at one point, Danny even somebody. So there's the other couple there, and they claim that the guy had left and left his girlfriend there, and then he's like, well, who would do that? And she's like, I could see you doing that.
Yes, yeah.
So Danny told Christian that. So
again, I love. So what he did with his relationship in this film.
So those elements are all very entertaining and that's probably relatable for a lot of people on both sides of it.
Yeah. And that's the story to this film. It's about her almost dependency on it, but it's easy to see why she's dependent. You know what I mean? In the beginning, she's even self-conscious about bothering him with anything with family drama.
Yeah.
But then that happens and she loses, her mother, father,
her
and
family.
sister. Yeah, so you could see why she would have to latch on, and then, why she would go.
Simon and Connie, who were the couple, where they claimed that Simon left Connie, and they were engaged to be married, so obviously things are going well for them. Then they apparently just killed him and then her. And then Mark accidentally urinates on the ancestral tree where they put the ashes of the ancestors. And so he's marked for death because one of the villagers is death staring him the entire time.
Well, Mark's very funny throughout the whole thing because he's whining about bugs. Obviously he's just wanting there to have sex with Swedish women. You could see why he was hanging around also. Even he's trying to get with one of the women
and
there.
Then, when they did drugs, he was funny because he was like, oh, don't bring new people over. I'm on a trip. Yeah.
So the Wizard of Oz thing too. He had brought up the comparisons he had spotted after the fact, I think. But there's a thing with a man stuffed in straw at the end of the film, and there was a couple things. But he said basically, it's almost like in this place. Is it Hogar? Everything is constructed to allow Danny to, I don't want to say process, but go through what she needs to go through to have this journey she has. Almost like Wizard of Oz, like Dorothy. Oz is constructed for Dorothy and for her to come to her realization at the end, and even in this film he mentions how when they're wherever they're at, when they're in the States, essentially everything is so muted and almost bleak looking, and then it's like a whole new colorful world, and there's also foreshadowing in that there's a picture in her room, I believe, of I think a woman. Let's see here. I wrote it down.
There was a lot of stuff I was paying attention to and didn't like.
The production design was amazing.
There's a lot of paintings and pictures and things. I'm sure were foreshadowing things.
Let's see here. Let me see if I can find. I might not be, but essentially there was a picture of a woman with flowers over her head, and I think with dancing with a bear, I believe.
Yeah.
So. And in my mind too, I was almost thinking this could easily be interpreted. I don't think it is, but that. They get there she, they do psychedelics right away, and maybe this is all a fabrication of her mind and her trip. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of, and obviously I don't think anything's been led to this, but just the nature of this film, I think it's fun to explore a lot of different things.
At points in the movie, you see the reality shifting, which is indicating the characters are on the psychedelic drugs. But yes, I mean, so throughout, and then
Pele's parents too. Talking about character development in the beginning. I didn't want to mention this earlier, but he talks to her about him losing his parents.
Yeah,
and he says they were burned in a fire.
And then you find out they were sacrifices for the. Well, they said it's only every 90 years for that specific
festival.
one. I guess that means every year they sacrifice some amount of people.
Yes, I don't know. Yeah,
maybe it's a smaller amount or something. Because that was something that also I came away. I was like, wait a minute, if it's only every 90 years, then are the other festivals just people having group sex and doing drugs, or are they killing people? But it does seem like it was probably killing people, I guess. Because if it's 72 people sacrifice themselves, then that's something that made it constant. But
there was also more foreshadowing. When they're driving there, they talk about why are the women there so hot? And they said, well, the Vikings brought all the best women from around the world there. Essentially, that's what people in this village are doing. They're finding great mates and bringing them there because, they don't want to have too much incest going on, essentially.
And two, they show one of the paintings in the village of a love ceremony.
Yes, yeah.
That's where the woman would cut her pubic hair and put it in the man's food, and then would put her blood in his drink. So later when Christian is eating food and he eats the food that has one of the hairs in it, everybody else has a more yellowish lemonade looking drink and his is more orangish reddish.
Yes, yeah.
So it's very clear what they did there, and they don't ever go back to that specific. I think at one point they're like, oh, there's a pube in your food.
Yeah. And he's like, shut up, dude. He's like, why should you be embarrassed?
Yeah, so
again, very funny movie throughout the whole thing.
So there's lighthearted elements like that are comedic. And then, like I was saying, so when you talk something that makes it kind of hard to tell is how much free will is exhibited by characters. So, when you get to the end, so they have a certain amount of sacrifices they make every year, and they sacrifice, the 4 outsiders. So, the couple, and then Mark and Josh.
And it should be known too that they are ethnically diverse. They are not Caucasian, and somebody brought up that possibly they are there specifically only to be sacrificed because everybody in the village seems to be
white.
Yeah, all Caucasian.
Yeah, so that could be.
So that's also another, I guess, angle to look at as maybe light commentary. Maybe you know what I mean.
And it's another example of the non-white people dying first.
Yeah. Yes.
In a film, but.
But in this, it's almost the point of.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
So you have these sacrifices that go on. So basically, Christian gets wooed to mate with a young woman who was just, given the official okay to mate and have a child. And he's wooed. So this is where it's not clear how much is his own free will wanting to do this and how much is being drugged and kind of suggestive. But I think he wanted out the entire time, so this is just the way to get out of the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also all symbolic. You know what I mean? Whether or not he was drugged, but I think definitely it makes it clear that he was drugged on some level.
Yeah.
And he almost snaps out of it. But also, it's the end of his orgasm when, people snap out of things,
know. Well, then...
as many comedians talk about, But that I thought that was also hilarious because he snaps out of it and he starts running around naked, and that's when everything also starts to come to head for him, and he becomes immediately sober. Basically,
the older woman joins in, is pushing him from behind, trying to get him to finish.
Again, hilarious.
So basically, when they bring the outsiders in, they'll use them to essentially seed or impregnate their women there. And then I guess if somebody was a really good specimen, or somebody they really wanted around, they could join the community. And then Danny wins the May Queen, which, you assumed would happen. And then she gets to decide.
At this point, I think you knew that she was mostly going to be okay, only because the film, you know what I mean? There's just something about it that you don't feel like she's going to be the person that ends up in the wicker basket. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we have all these other, quote unquote, not great people.
So the May Queen gets to decide for the final tribute if it's one of the villagers or Christian. At this point, he's been drugged, so he can't move or talk, and he's just in a wheelchair. And she chooses him as the sacrifice, and he gets put into the remains of a bear and then put in the barn with the two tribute to give their life from the village, and then the bodies or the skin or the remains of the others that have died as sacrifices. And then like one of the, I guess, kind of head priest comes in and gives them this drug that's supposed to take away their fear and their pain. And then once they actually catch on fire, it definitely doesn't take away the pain.
So it makes you think, like, what was there any quote unquote witchcraft that was working in this film? You know what I mean? Like,
because so they get given this stuff, and then once they actually get on fire, they're screaming. And so I would assume that Christian, even though he's immobilized, did not have any pain killing.
Yes.
But then again, it'd be kind of difficult to kill someone's motor functions without also impacting. Well, I guess you could.
Yeah.
You could impact motor function without.
Again, this works in a weird, and you don't know if they're screaming because it is a catharsis. It seems painful, but then the villagers scream essentially, and Danny before this too. So the reason Danny agreed this is because she saw him having sex with that woman, and then she has this communal cry basically
with all the other,
and it seems like that's also, she's already been accepted in this community, but this is like her turning point.
Well, because at some point, Pell asked her, Pell asked her, he's like, do you feel loved and do you feel like you're part of the family? Basically implying her relationship with Christian was not good.
Yes, and again, she lost the family. She was hanging on to Christian, and now, the resolution is she finds this new family and catharsis, and essentially I think her role was to pick an embodiment of I don't want to say evil, but negative or bad forces. And for her, he was that negative force because the community wasn't they were no harm to her. You know what I mean? Like, and that was her ridding her life and that community of evil, essentially, or kind of bad energy. And that was like a cathartic thing for her. And so it's a very interesting ending where it's like, do you cheer for her having this personal victory, but it's also in such a messed up context, and that's what I love about it, is that it has an interesting ending. It's not just good, bad, whatever. Yeah, it is a mixture of emotions that I think are strong also.
Because there's a lot of that he deserved what happened, and there's also the element too where their religion essentially is due to a kid that's a product of incest, drawing paintings that they interpret. Yeah. And I mean, that's not.
And he didn't literally deserve the fate he got based on his actions.
No,
did Julie see this, by the way?
No, but she had asked him about it, so she knew what happened.
Well, he didn't literally deserve this, but in again, this is almost like a fantasy world. It's almost like a Wizard of Oz fantasy world. Thematically, he deserved
something
to be burned, to be burned in her mind. Yeah. Again, this could all, even if you look at an angle of her imagination, like this is maybe what she would imagine his penalty or his fate should be. I love that about the ending. That is
a lot of people layered. In the moment might think that's an appropriate punishment.
Exactly, yeah, and her state of mind, also the trauma, the drugs. Everything, just seeing that happen.
Somebody that's on different prescription medication for depression and things like that, and dealing with personal tragedy, probably shouldn't take psychedelic drugs.
Yes, yeah.
Just from what I've seen in the real world, I've heard of people having like bad trips and stuff, and having to go to like a psych ward or something. So there's just things that
Yeah. So I mean, really, again, the fun of the film. I'm going to look through my notes one more time to make sure, but. The fact that the film was so fun, it was funny, it was a great summer movie because they were on this trip. It was, again, even though it's a very messed up place, if it wasn't messed up, it's some place you might like to go. You know what I mean? Like it has those fun elements. It's very funny. I like the characters as far as I like spending time with them because either they are being assholes and it is entertaining watching the friction between characters, or they're just flat out funny, or opportunistic. Just and the situational horror, I like those elements, the cliff stuff, and then the ending being complex on many levels, but also like it's very twisted, but in a gleeful way. That's like, hey, again, I walked out in a good mood. Like I like that, but that it was so dark, but also uplifting in a weird way. Like that's why I love this film, and that's why for me it's like a 10 out of 10 because it is so much more than just a A to B adventure or horror film where we get a good ending or we get a bad ending and the person gets away. You know, the final girl survives. It's so much more than that. And that's why, again, this is my type of horror film versus... it almost gave me the type of glee I got from watching, say, Friday the 13th as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, it felt new and exciting in some ways, even though it's in that genre.
I mean, I prefer for stuff like this, people swing for the fences, because even if every iteration doesn't connect, you at least got something you hadn't seen exactly before.
Yes, yeah.
And that's why,
it's something to think about.
If you go back a few episodes of our Child's Play 2019 review, so the new remake, like, I wish that one had gone more in a direction that didn't just back into the same concept as the original films, in terms of just like a doll killing people. I wish they'd gone even further in the nature nurture stuff and had it be like, you know, because in that movie, I guess they want to keep the kills up to a certain pace. I wish they had held them till later in the film.
Yes,
and had it be more earned. But like this one, even if it doesn't connect with people totally, like, I prefer to see people out here supporting movies that are original concept, or not original concept, but original properties, and seemingly not having a ton of restraints in what they're doing.
Yeah,
versus
he got final cut on this, apparently. He said he wants to put out a director's cut, but he doesn't necessarily think it would be better, but this is more accessible, but I think it's only going to be like 20 minutes more.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah.
But it's great that he got final cut and did exactly, you know, maybe he had to adhere to some things, but this seems like this was probably the film he wanted to make.
Well, and then too, makes you wonder, like, what, you know, was his sales pitch to get Hereditary made with Toni Collette and the cast they had involved with it. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times funding from films is very much related to, you've got this person in the movie who guarantees this amount of funding because, you know, make this return in these territories. So it just makes you wonder, like, what was the pitch you got? You know, how well did that script read? But I've also, like, the was it the Blockbusters, the podcast Writers Blockbusters, like Hereditary, and even these aren't scripts that are to point to college students or writers on the up and up, like, here's a template of what to do, because these are all very much succeeding in spite of not following the rules or not following the exact blueprints and templates. And, you know, even though it has a lot of the thematic things there you can latch onto, they don't have, like, the B plot kicks in at minute 20 and this happens at or whatever minute. They don't follow that structure specifically. So movies that succeed because of the tone and the performances, not really just, you know, there are some, like, gore moments in this, like, that are on par with a lot of slasher films.
Yeah, and again, I think this is smartly doesn't just lean into a genre and makes one of these films with some slight spins. He uses what you know, if you have any knowledge of what, you know, this type of film is, that because you know things bad are going to happen, I think it can be a little bit, take its time getting there, and it actually, for me, added to it as opposed to just bored me, you know. It's, you know, so one of the thing about foreshadowing too, they talked about earlier, somebody mentioned that earlier in the film the kids were playing Skin the Fool. And somebody ends up getting skinned and stuffed in a straw body. Yeah,
Christian's the one that gets tapped, but he doesn't get skinned. It's just because a girl was interested in him as the mate. Yeah, and that's literally just as the mate, not as a lover, a continuous boyfriend, but just to impregnate her.
Yeah, again,
And I guess they've got their biological clock down to the second in that community, because just one time, because a lot of people try for like 2 years to have a kid.
It's the medicine, the flowers.
Well, it's just blah, blah, blah.
I'm very excited to walk out of this film being as excited for it as I was, just because I'm like, okay, good. For me this year, as far as theatrical releases, there's a lot of stuff I need to watch on streaming, but
I definitely
got Us and this for me is like, okay, it's been a good year already.
I'm interested to see what the director does next, and to see if he continues making films.
And he did a quick while he was on post production for Hereditary, he was in pre-production for this. So I don't know how fast he's spinning up for his next one, but I mean, if he can do quick turnarounds like this, he might be like sort of a. I'm just talking about filmography. I'll put a Woody Allen of horror. If he has that many scripts done and he's able to spin them out, it'd be cool if we got a new film from him every 2 years.
I think most filmmakers usually work in fits and starts, because you get attached to other stuff or get bogged down. Or you may have a disagreement on a script with financiers or an actor or other people, going back and forth for a long time to get it right.
But if they work in a smaller budget, you know, the ones that work outside of the system that do kind of work closer on an indie scale, which still this isn't, you know, this is 10, 15 million. you know, they're able to, like Jim Jarmusch, you know what I mean? He just turns out films, Noah Baumbach. You know what I mean? Like they are, if as long as they're not going for a film that has to be co-produced by Paramount and Sony and, you know what I mean? And we got to get these actors on board and win their schedule. If they're able just to make stuff, then there's no restrictions. And for me, you know, you can have a lot more swings that way and a lot more potential hits.
I think just the only peril you have, you know, especially like with The Dead Don't Die, which I know Derek really likes.
Yes, I need to see that.
But a lot of times when you like attach these bigger name stars and you have a premise that sounds like it's one thing, people wanted The Dead Don't Die to be Zombieland 2. And that's very much not what it is.
Yeah.
So I think people sometimes like expectations get messed around. And I think that's where movies like this, Midsommar, probably did take a beating in like what's the score? Wherever like people like the exit scores and the elite movies. Because a lot of times horror movies like this do that. They'll get very high critical reviews and even like good average user reviews, but like the polling of the average moviegoer that went into it that's not the cinephile gives it like an F.
Yeah, and we'll see how this film plays over time. You know, it's some of the best horror films of all time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it takes a long time to figure out where
you know, I'll be interesting to see where this lands with most audience and how it lands with me after rewatching it, you know, a few times. Hopefully, I was just hitting my shirt.
Okay, I was like, something happened.
Hopefully it stays up there. But regardless, I had a great time. I would recommend going to see it in theaters for sure, just because it is such a beautiful film. It sounds great, and it is long. It's easier for me to watch long films in theaters. So, I definitely recommend checking this out this summer.
Yep. So that will wrap up our discussion of Midsommar. Thanks for listening to the House by Visceral podcast. We're out.
House by the